In many superhero tales, there are a few common stages to the story. There's the almost obligatory origin plot point, the incident that sets the hero on their path while keeping much of the truth of this change from the public. Then there's a build toward public awareness of the hero. They start to branch out into more well-reported rescues. And while many people show appreciation for the hero's arrival, there are always some who reject or think poorly of the hero. And then we get to the altercation with the big bad of the story. It's the climax of the tale. And if it's a film, this is when the music kicks into high gear with a driving beat as someone cries out, "Somebody save me," or "I need a hero," or "A hero's gonna save me just in time." This is the moment when the true heroism of the person shows itself on full display. The moment when we see them be a hero. The past couple of chapters from 1 Samuel that we've seen in our series recently are like those first few stages of those superhero tales. In chapter 9 and the first half of chapter 10, we saw the origin of Saul's role as king of Israel. It was kept quiet for a while when only Samuel and Saul knew that God had chosen him to be king. Then, with the rest of chapter 10, we saw in the last sermon Saul's role as protector of the people becoming publicly known, even if he did hide at the time. And while there were men of valor backing this newly crowned king, some worthless men also questioned the value of his heroism. Could this man really be the deliverer they wanted? Is this guy really our hero? But now, in chapter 11, we get to the climax of Saul's role as God's human agent of deliverance. The height of Saul's story arc in the book of Samuel. This is when we see Saul be the hero that the people wanted. Somebody to be inspired by. And he even kind of flickers hints of Jesus' work in delivering the people of God from sin. The rising hope of the people seems at this moment to be rightly placed as Saul stands not only as deliverer of the nation, but also as overcomer of generations-old prejudice against his hometown. But I get a little ahead of myself. I will point out the messianic allusions and the historic parallels along the way. But for now, let's get to the setup of the story. The big bad and his villainous plot that calls Saul to act. 1 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1-3. Then Nahash the Ammonite went up and besieged Jabesh-Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, "Make a treaty with us, and we will serve you." But Nahash the Ammonite said to them, "On this condition I will make a treaty with you, that I gouge out all your right eyes, and thus bring disgrace on all Israel." The elders of Jabesh said to him, "Give us 7 days' respite, that we may send messengers throughout all the territory of Israel. Then if there is no one to save us, we will give ourselves up to you." I gotta start this part with a little bit about Nahash. This name, Nahash, seems to be a dynastic name for the Ammonite kings more than his actual name. And so there are a few Nahashes mentioned in records. While it's likely that this name has something to do with a word that's in the realm of divination or omen, it's also a Hebrew word for serpent. And since there are a few messianic hints in the tale, I find it kind of interesting that the deliverer is defeating a serpent. Like how the prophecy from Genesis 3 spoke of the seed of the woman, meaning Jesus specifically, crushing the head of the serpent. There are already overtones that remind us of Jesus, and we are only 2 words into the story. Anyway, according to some records, this Nahash has been on the rampage throughout the area east of the Jordan River. This includes the real estate where the 2.5 tribes of Israel that are on that side of the river had settled during the conquest under Moses and Joshua. It seems that Nahash's victories over various peoples in the area had led him to demanding those who lost remove their right eyes, which would make it nearly impossible to ever mount a rebellion, since the left eye was often covered by a warrior's shield in battle. So, when Nahash surrounded a town in Israelite lands called Jabesh-Gilead, it seemed like a sure defeat to the townspeople. They couldn't mount a defense. He'd already defeated town after town, and they were not ready for this. So they asked for terms of surrender. It would just be easier to give up and let the serpent have his way. But Nahash didn't just want to defeat the people, he wanted to humiliate them. So his terms were that all the people have their right eyes gouged out, admit defeat, and permanently mar their own bodies, while he cackled in victory. And notice in verse 2 that it says that this act would bring disgrace upon the whole nation of Israel. It would show that Israel couldn't defend its borders, especially on this far side of the river. This act of Nahash reminds me of our own struggle with sin. How the assaults of our own serpent, the enemy of God, often leave us wanting to give up, to surrender to our sin instead of standing righteous before our God. Except the terms always come at a cost, and that cost attempts its hardest to mar the images of God that we are, as the serpent cackles at his supposed snub of the God that he wishes he could be. We stand in trouble and in need of a hero, a deliverer, a savior to rescue us. And this is where the people of Jabesh-Gilead find themselves in reality. So the elders pleaded with Nahash to give them 7 days to call out for aid. Then if there was no one to save them, no deliverer, then they would do exactly as Nahash asked. I personally find it interesting that the word for deliverer used here sounds very much like Messiah, even though the two words don't come from the same root. Again, tiny hints toward God's greater king in whom we should never lose hope. Now it seems that Nahash believed his victory was so sure that no one would come to save the people of Jabesh-Gilead because he let them have their 7 days. You want 7 days to try to find someone? Sure. Go ahead. Ain't no one coming. And so in this time the people of Jabesh-Gilead sent out throughout the entire land of Israel for someone to deliver them. Somebody save us. But these words did not fall on deaf ears. Somebody heard them. A deliverer rose to act. 1 Samuel chapter 11 verses 4-7. When the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul, they reported the matter in the ears of the people. And all the people wept aloud. Now behold, Saul was coming in from the field behind the oxen. And Saul said, "What is wrong with the people that they are weeping?" So they told him the news of the men of Jabesh. And the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul when he heard these words, and his anger was greatly kindled. He took a yoke of oxen and cut them in pieces and sent them throughout all the territory of Israel by the hand of messengers, saying, "Whoever does not come out after Saul and Samuel, so it shall be done to his oxen." Then the dread of the Lord fell upon the people, and they came out as one man. The messengers from Jabesh-Gilead spread out throughout the entire land of Israel, explaining the situation to whoever would listen. But none seemed to step up as deliverer. That is, until they came to a town called Gibeah. 2 things to talk about with Gibeah. First, notice how quickly it had become known as Gibeah of Saul. The town had already become synonymous with the nation's first king, even though he had yet done nothing other than be shown as chosen by God to be their king. I mean, he's still out there plowing his father's fields by himself right here. Not very much of a kingly act, if you ask me. But the second thing about Gibeah, we'll take a little bit of a history lesson. There is recorded an event that happened in this same town, from Judges chapters 19-21. It was very few generations between the time of the Judges and the book of Samuel's events. Remember, Eli and Samuel are basically considered to be the last of the Judges. So we're talking something around Saul's great-grandparents to great-great-great-grandparents. And I'd be willing to wager that the lesser number of generations is probably the more likely. We talked about this event in Gibeah in our series of the book of Judges that we had a few years ago. And trust me, it is no easier to talk about right now than it was then. It deals with the attempted homosexual rape of a man, the actual rape of the man's concubine, the eventual disfigurement of that woman's dead body, the near genocide of an Israelite tribe, and the eventual kidnapping of young women in order to bear children for that same near-extinct tribe. There's a whole lot of mess going on in those few chapters, but we kind of have to remind ourselves of a few of the details in order to see Saul perform a seeming reversal of these horrible acts. See, there was in the time of Judges a Levite and his concubine who came to Gibeah, the same town we're talking about in case these names are flying by too quickly. And the men of Gibeah tried to force themselves on this Levite. We know that it was sexually charged because the Levite cowardly tossed his concubine out for the men to have their way with. And those men eventually killed her because of the loathsome acts done to her. The Levite then chopped up the dead woman's body in order to send the pieces all across Israel as a battle cry against the town of Gibeah. The whole nation, including Jabesh-Gilead, the town who in our Samuel passage is being attacked by Nahash, came out against Gibeah. The Judges passage specifically calls out Jabesh-Gilead's joining in with the rest of Israel to go against Gibeah. So these two cities don't have good history with one another. In the time of the Judges, the battle lines were drawn against the whole tribe of Benjamin, because they joined with Gibeah against the rest of the nation. And because of the sin of the men of Gibeah, nearly the whole tribe was wiped out, men, women, and children. But when the dust settled, the other 11 tribes realized the extreme that they had gone to, nearly wiping out the entire tribe of Benjamin in one fell swoop. So, because they had made vows to not allow their daughters to marry a Benjamite, they ended up making a plan to repopulate the whole tribe by kidnapping young girls from nearby towns and give them as wives to the few Benjamites who were left. This is a terrible dark mark in the Israelite history that few talk about because of the many atrocities mentioned. But it's important for us to see the connections with Saul. I mean, Saul's great-grandmother might have been one of those young kidnapped women. And the history of those evil events was certainly on the minds of those who lived in and around Saul's hometown of Gibeah. Perhaps this is even why some of the people who rejected the kingship of Saul felt the way they did at the end of the previous chapter. How could a man from that town be chosen to be our king and protector? But now, word comes from Jabesh-Gilead, one of the cities specifically called out as those who marched against Gibeah. These people are in trouble and need a deliverer. And when Saul comes in from the fields, he hears the commotion and immediately acts. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, rushed upon him, just like the Spirit had upon the judges of old, the empowering Spirit to perform a specific act of deliverance in the name of God. And what is it that Saul does? He takes the very cattle with which he had been plowing the fields, and he butchers them into pieces and sends them off to the rest of Israel in order to call them to battle against Nahash and the Ammonites. Thankfully, it was only a couple of animals instead of a dead woman's body this time. But the parallels between the two events remain clear. The Israelites are being called to war with a threat of what would happen if they refused to join. Only this time they'd be led by a man from Gibeah to fight on the side of the people of Jabesh-Gilead. The enemy to be stopped is not one of their own tribes, but a nation abusing the people of God. The king of the Ammonites, who was so sure of his victory, would meet the full force of Israelite might, with a heroic king leading them in battle, and their God empowering the whole nation with his mighty spirit. The thing that seemed to be so sure for Nahash would be his defeat. In a united front with a single will focused on saving these people, the Israelites rallied within just a few days, and the promise of a deliverer from the serpent returned to the people of Jabesh-Gilead, a promise that would truly deliver. 1 Samuel chapter 11, verses 8 to 10. When he mustered them at Bezek, the people of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. And they said to the messengers who had come, "Thus you shall say to the men of Jabesh-Gilead, Tomorrow, by the time the sun is hot, you shall have deliverance." When the messengers came and told the men of Jabesh, they were glad. Therefore the men of Jabesh said, "Tomorrow we will give ourselves up to you, and you may do to us whatever seems good to you." The rendezvous point for the army of Israel was a place called Bezek. There, the deliverer king, the one empowered by the Spirit of God, numbered his troops. It was a huge army ready for the task. And notice that the tribe of Judah is called out for adding 10% of what the rest of the nation had. One of the 12 tribes had sent about 10% of the army, more than their fair share. It shows the fighting spirit of the tribe of Judah, which will be proven all the more as Israelite history proceeds. But for now, let's recognize the power of God in this moment. People in the land of Israel called out for help, and God sent his chosen king to deliver. The king rallied the nation, a king whom many doubted his ability to lead, a king who had literally yesterday been plowing his father's fields. But because God empowered his actions, the deliverance would be great. The messengers who had come from Jabesh-Gilead were sent back with a message. "Tomorrow, when the sun is at the height of its heat, at the apex of its travel across the sky, you will have the deliverance that you asked for. It'll be done and over. Finished. Deliverance complete." And so the people of Jabesh-Gilead came up with a ploy to aid their deliverers. They faked that they would surrender to Nahash on the next day. His defenses would be lowered with this promised surrender. He'd never expect a battle on that same day, ignorant of the deliverer because the serpent relished in his supposed victory. The people of Jabesh-Gilead even used wordplay in their response, saying that Nahash could do whatever seemed good to him to do. Literally, the Hebrew says that he could do to the people all that is good in your eyes. It's darkly humorous considering that what was good in his eyes was taking one of theirs. But little did he know that this people would find deliverance right at that moment that they seemed most defeated. It reminds me of the cross, when the enemy of God, the serpent of old, felt that he had defeated the plan of God by having Jesus hung on the cross. Only in that moment it was not the defeat of his enemies that came, but deliverance that happened through the cross. The serpent had his head smashed to mush, just like Nahash was about to. 1 Samuel chapter 11, verses 11 to 15. And the next day Saul put the people in 3 companies. And they came into the midst of the camp in the morning watch, and struck down the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And those who survived were scattered, so that no 2 of them were left together. Then the people said to Samuel, "Who is it that said, 'Shall Saul reign over us?' Bring the men, that we may put them to death." But Saul said, "Not a man shall be put to death this day. For today the Lord has worked salvation in Israel." Then Samuel said to the people, "Come, let us go to Gilgal, and there renew the kingdom." So all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. There they sacrificed peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. Saul had promised deliverance by the heat of the day, but the plan began in those dark, early morning hours. Before the crack of dawn, Saul's 3 companies of troops surrounded the camp and attacked while most of the Ammonite army was still asleep, possibly hungover if they were celebrating their expected victory. The Israelites slaughtered the Ammonites as the sun rose on the horizon, and all the way until the sun's zenith in the sky. The few Ammonites that survived the surprise attack fled, not a pair of them together, each one alone in his defeat. Just as promised, deliverance came before the hottest part of the day. God's deliverance always comes when he promises it. Hyped up by the victory led by their human king, the people turned toward those who had refused Saul's kingship before. This hero had proven himself able to save, and they felt the need to call out those who spurned his heroism. This man from Gibeah had proven that some men from the town can be more than a degenerate. But Saul calls them to keep their bloodlust in check. It wasn't Saul alone who had delivered that day. The Lord is the one who brought salvation to Israel. He, as their human leader, is merely an agent of God's deliverance. It was God's chosen king, through whom he brought salvation to his humble people. In an effort to let those who refused Saul's previous coronation now prove their loyalty, Samuel calls the people to Gilgal so that they could renew the previously questioned kingship of Saul. A 3rd time shown to be king, and this time, because he had proven to be a deliverer, few held back their hope in this human king. They celebrated and sacrificed to God in renewal of this new method of leadership in Israelite history. The serpent had been defeated. And for us, he has as well. At the cross and the resurrection, Jesus defeated sin by crushing the serpent's head. And because of that, restoration is available for all who humbly submit to God's chosen king, we who bow before the cross of Jesus. Sin and Satan want us to destroy our own bodies as we feel utterly surrounded and defeated by him, to feel like we have no deliverer. He wants us to give in to the sins that so easily cause us to fall and fail, those things we know that we shouldn't do, but still feel like giving in so easily. He wants us to bring disgrace on the God whom we represent on this planet. But we do have a deliverer, a true king and a Messiah, who is ready and able to save. And he doesn't need an army to bring that salvation. So why should we doubt his word of deliverance? Why should we refuse his aid and give in to our sins? He will deliver his humble people. So let's humble ourselves. Let's ask for a deliverer in every difficulty and sin and problem of this life. Ask for the deliverer that we need. We might not get the trouncing victory that he promised the Israelites here, but we will have victory according to God's terms.